عادي اونلاين. حاجة تبعهم ساعة كده.
Okay, in the interest of time, I think we should get started and we keep on accepting people in as they join us. Thank you for being here this afternoon. I'm very pleased today that we have Dr. Sarah Hopp from City University, London, who will be talking to us about the complexities of neurodiversity from a personal perspective, and also will be sharing some examples of good practice happening at her institution. We're recording the session anyway, but without further ado, then I'll just let Sarah start her presentation.
Thank you very much, Melissa, and thank you all for having me on here today. I'm just going to share my screen, if that's possible. Let me just pull up a slideshow. Okay, is it possible to share the screen at all? Oh, right, okay, let me just see if I can do it this way. Okay, bear with me one moment. So can you all see this at all?
Yes, it's coming up.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay,
Thank
lovely.
you.
Okay, thank you. So as I said, thank you for having me here today. I'm the Student Disability and Neurodiversity Manager at City University of London. And I've run this, it's the seminar that I'm giving today is part of a programme that I run from 6 sessions, and I've run it across the university, at different universities, and also within the NHS and at different symposiums as well. It's a very informal session, so please feel free to stop and ask any questions. Melissa, I would be really grateful if you could just keep, because I can only see you at the moment, so I'd be really grateful if someone puts up their hands, if you could just let me know, please. Thank you very much. I'm to tell you a little bit about myself. So I've been at City for 2 years now. I have a doctorate in educational philosophy and research. I have a specialism in ADHD and autism. And my dissertation was around working relationships of trust based on empathy and compassion, which I believe are central to education, and the philosophical teachings of Martha Nussbaum. I'm also a blogger and presenter for HE Professional and for Optimus Education. And I run a private business, consultancy business as well, where I consult firms up in the city, and also mentor Senkos that are new to post. In another life, I was a Senko, so Special Educational Needs Coordinator at Sixth Form College for 25 years. And I'm also dyspraxic. So developmental coordination disorder. And as I was just telling Melissa just before I arrived back home today, I fell over. So I'm making a little bit. So please bear with me if my word retrieval goes during this presentation. So without further ado, I'll begin. And remember, please stop and ask me as well. Okay. So the term neurodiversity, we see it everywhere all the time, and it's commonly we hear neurodiverse and neurotypical. But the term neurodiversity is actually a political term. And what it does is it was coined by Judy Singer in 1998, and the term neurodiversity describes the whole of humanity. So basically, what it is, it's a phrase, it's terminology to express that we are all individuals, we are all unique in the way that that we're made up, in the way that our brains are made up, the way our physiology, our life experiences, the culture we're born into, the religion we're born into, our gender, sexuality, and all of that's the intersectionality. Okay, and she created the neurodiversity movement as a political movement for people who want their human rights. So it's a recognition. And part of the reason why she needed to do this was historical. So we go back to, I'd like to take you back to the times of Jeremy Bentham and utilitarianism. So the slide that you can see in front of you now is what we call the panopticon model. So Jeremy Bentham created the panopticon model in the prison system, and if you go to Strangeways prison now, it's still there. So it's this sort of circular, you can see this sort of circular shape, and there would be a prison guard in the tower at the centre, and what would happen is that prison guard would be able to see each and every one of the prisoners, who would be treated all the same, who would have all who would have everything exactly the same in equal amounts, and were treated standardized, not as individuals. Okay, and it was based on surveillance as well. So from that single point, because of the shape of the rooms and because of the shape of the tower, the prisoners could be watched at any point through observation and surveillance and inspection. So because it was thought to be so successful, this model, what happened was they then thought, well, this would be great to have in hospitals and also in the education sector. And so they started to put people into groups and age groups and sets of ability. And also at the same time, you had the Industrial Revolution. So you had the education of the masses. And so people needed to be able, lots of people needed to be able to read and write. You had the invention of the printing press later on. And so what happened was they needed people to be to be taught skills. Assessment beforehand was, education was much more on a sort of what's called an apprenticeship model. So that was learning by doing, and of course that lends itself beautifully to creative divergent thinkers, as I'll explain in a minute. But also because the brain has a three-dimensional way of thinking when they're divergent thinkers, and so what happens then is that as soon as the printing press comes along, it makes things very difficult for a dyslexic person or a dyspraxic person to be able to demonstrate what they can do, and I'll explain a little bit about that in the next slide. But basically what happened with this panopticon model, the dawn of standardization, you have a very sort of punitive, very standardized, where everyone's treated the same. And so you have a whole cohort of people then, creative divergent thinkers, that are automatically excluded from society. So going back to the idea of a three-dimensional thinking. So if I said to you the word tree, for example, you may think of a tree. A divergent thinker would think of the roots, would see the roots of the tree, they'd turn the tree around, they'd see the leaves, the branches, they'd see the grain of the tree inside, what it looked like right inside, and they would be able to manipulate that that model inside their brains. So, and that lends itself beautifully to things like architecture, art, that sort of thing, for example. And so this is, it's a type of three-dimensional thinking. Now, with print, and remember that most of our assessment is carried out through reading and writing, what happens is the print is two-dimensional. So with a dyslexic brain, the brain's trying to change something that is two-dimensional, such as print, into 3 dimensions. So what it does is it starts to flip the P's and B's over and swap other letters and things like that as well. And so there, when you have someone that's reading whole text, then all of a sudden that brain has challenges. Now, if you've got an education system that is based on reading and writing and assessments based through that way, that person is going to have a lot of difficulty as well. And it's not just a dyslexic type person that would have these difficulties. As I'll show you later on, people with ADHD, dyspraxia, autism, we all share these types of traits because we're divergent thinkers. So that's just to give you a little bit of context to how neurodiversity sits within the education system. So the strengths that we have, the strengths. So when people think of spectrum, people often think of a spectrum as a graph, as a linear graph. But I like to think of it more as a Venn diagram, as we see here on this chart. Now, that's because both with some strengths and with some challenges as well, they will all intersect. And it really, everybody is somewhere on this Venn diagram, everyone in humanity. But it's where you fall on that Venn diagram that will give you your diagnosis. Strengths that we see, and I'm going to emphasize the strengths here because we focus on strength awareness and strength-based strategies at City, and I'll go through that in a minute. But strengths we see for dyspraxia are innovation, rapport, awareness of others. It's as if my brain and my body are disconnected. So my brain will tell my body to do one thing and my body will do something completely different. So, for example, if I get into a car, my brain will tell my left leg to move, but my right leg will move instead. And as happened this morning, I will constantly trip over things and forget words, etc. But what that means is then it's that my brain relies on the intuitive part of my brain a lot more, because I can't rely on my coordination and the physical part of my proprioception, etc. What happens then is that my brain will it will rely on how I feel about something or the energy and things like that. So, for example, I'm a paddleboard athlete, a racing paddleboard athlete. Now, my coach, when she tells me how to do something, she doesn't say, right, use your left leg, use your right leg and things like that. She will stand next to me and she will move on the board herself and I will mirror that. But then what happens is, as I'm racing, I feel that the board is part of me and I am part of the board. So it's all very intuitive. So I feel very much everything through, and it sounds a bit strange, but I feel everything through my body. And I can only do it through a way of a feeling. And that's the way that I relate to other people as well. I'm very good at picking up on people's moods and things like that. I'm very sensitive to that sort of thing, and this is partly because the way my brain's wired up. Now, I'm only just touched on that because I've got a whole session on dyspraxia that I do, and it's very, very complex. Dyslexia, we have the visual thinking, the creative ability, connecting ideas, and this sort of 3-dimensional mechanical ability. With ADHD, you have that wonderful creative divergent thinking, but done at great speed. So very good at hyper focusing, which can be both a good and a challenge as well. But being able to find solutions very, very quickly, having great energy and passion and things like that. Tourette's, fantastic ideas, creative ability, good cognitive control. And autism spectrum disorder, so being able to see things in a systematic way, fine detail to processing and sequencing and concentration. And the way that we like to look at it is that evolution has created specialist thinkers to bring to a variety of expertise in humanity. Now, the companies that I work with up in the city, they have tapped into this, and so they have done a great drive on recruiting neurodiverse staff and creating neuro-inclusive working environments. So, for example, some of them have got rid of desks and chairs, and they have the medicine balls. They've got glass panes to write across and ideas across and things like that, and very sort of sensory based. And we're starting to do that at City as well. Okay. Right, so some of the difficulties then, some of the barriers that we have are difficulties with organisation and memory, concentration, time, direction and perception. So that's perception of ideas, perception of when we're communicating, but also space perception as well. So I find it very difficult to estimate weights. I find it very difficult to estimate time and the amount of time it would take me to do things and things like that. Okay. We also have for ADHD, and I'll go into this a bit more detail in a minute. So there's sort of mood swings, hyperactivity, low frustration thresholds. They can be easily distracted or over focus and lack inhibitions. I may share some traits with someone with ADHD. So, for example, that may be I might get distracted. For example, if I start brushing my teeth in the morning and I'm thinking, and all of a sudden I'll start to think about the meaning of life. And I'll put my electric toothbrush down, which is still running, and I'll go down, and all of a sudden I'll remember that I've got to feed the dog. So I go downstairs, I open the freezer, I take the dog food out, and then I realise actually I've got something else to do in the kitchen. Freezer door's left open, everything's melting, the electric toothbrush upstairs is still going, and then I've started another task, and then I'll go on something else. All before I get to work in the morning. So my point being is that someone with ADHD, that will happen to as well. So rather than thinking of these as sort of separate, different conditions, they are all sort of, they interlink together. Okay, and each person will be slightly different. So I'm just going to focus today a little bit on difficulties specific to ADHD, because this is the largest cohort of students that we have here at City. And then I'll go into what we're doing for our how we support the students and the structure of our department, which is very new. So right up until the 1970s, research on ADHD was about emotional dysregulation. It wasn't about not being able to focus on things. Wasn't until it was starting to be recognised in schools. Then the focus on research started they started to focus on sorry, my word retrieval was just gone now. They started to focus on not being able to concentrate and things like that, because it was affecting students in the classroom. But we see with our students coming through the doors that one of the things that they wanted to communicate to their tutors, they felt that they had this emotional dysregulation. So because the dopamine flow isn't consistent with someone with ADHD, because it's coming in spurts, there's either lots of dopamine or there's none. So student or member of staff may come in the morning full of beans, ready to go, lots of energy, etc. And then all of a sudden by 11 o'clock there's a massive slump, and it's leave me alone, can't do this, don't want to do it, I hate life, etc. So you see this very sort of spiky profile of emotion all within sort of one day. And medication can help with that. Other difficulties are difficulty focusing and filtering out non-relevant information. So it shouldn't really be called attention deficit disorder, because people are focusing on everything. The difficulty is that they can't focus anything out at all. So they're trying to, so for example, Melissa, I'm looking at you. I can see that there's a wall in the background. I can see there's a plant in the background, etc. And I can filter that out. Someone with ADHD would be looking at all of those things and not being able to filter things out. At the same time, they may have constant flooding of thoughts as well. So one of my students described it as if they had 11 televisions on different channels going on in their head all at the same time. So that takes up a lot of physical energy. They can hyperfocus, so like I mentioned before, so hyperfocus, where they're focusing on something really interesting, they get into what's called a state of flow, where they lose track of, they're concentrating so much they lose track of space and time, and before they know it, they've literally studied for, say, for example, 10 or 11 hours without a break. And we found that we've had a lot of students that have skipped meals, there's had lack of exercise, and then they've burnt out. We have to be really careful with that at City as well, because our library is open for 24 hours across the week. So we have to work with the library and with students to ensure that the students are taking regular breaks. They can have obsessive thoughts and cycles and overthinking as well, because of that very sort of, because if you live in a society that doesn't understand you and you don't understand society, you can become very anxious on a social level, on a communicative level, and on an academic level as well. And this can lead to obsessive ruminating on mistakes or possibilities of mistakes. And so these obsessive thoughts or any sort of perceived criticism, and it may not be criticism, but it may be taken as criticism, that can lead to this sort of rumination, these cycles and these overthinking, constantly changing your mind backwards and forwards because you're not quite sure. Constantly losing things. This is something that I do all the time. And my daughter, we're constantly having discussions about that. We'll constantly lose my phone, my keys, etc. We'll constantly, people with ADHD also get lost in the streets. I will get lost as a dyspraxic person. I will get lost as well. My daughter has me on a tracker, and in case I get lost when I'm out at night. So sensory sensitivities as well. So this is something that all of us neurodiverse people share. So for me, it will be, I'm hypersensitive to sound. So if I'm giving a lecture and at the back of the lecture hall, there are the caterers come in, for example, and they start to undo the sandwiches. Right, well, that rustling at the back, I can't filter that out, and so therefore I'll completely lose track of what I'm saying. Also, lecturing over the internet is much more difficult for me because I take a lot of my communication non-verbally as well. So if Melissa, if you didn't have your camera on, it would be almost impossible for me to talk. I would also, with the sound, one of the strengths is that I can speak 5 languages fluently, but I'm hypersensitive. If I walk past a pylon, I can really hear that and it really resonates through me. And I can also hear, you know, the plugins that you have for ants and for mice and things like those sonic things. Well, I can hear that frequency, and it absolutely drives me crazy. So you can be hypersensitive and you can be undersensitive as well. So you can have sensory seeking behaviours. So for example, I like to eat really, really hot things because otherwise it tastes bland. Nothing wrong with my taste buds, but it's the information that's going between my brain and my mouth that's not, it's out of sync. So people with ADHD, autism and dyspraxia share these sensory sensitivities. Mood swings. So often people with bipolar are misdiagnosed with ADHD and vice versa. The main difference is someone with ADHD will have a mood swings within a day, several mood swings maybe within a day, and someone with bipolar would have those mood swings over time, so over a number of weeks. So we go up, 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 and then they would, and then their mood would go down over a period of time, and often with a manic phase. The manic phase doesn't happen with someone with ADHD. Sleeping difficulties as well. This happens with someone with dyspraxia, we share, and autism. So either not being able to get to sleep because you can't switch off those thoughts, or getting to sleep and waking up and then not being able to get to sleep. Difficulties with relationships and communication, so taking things very literally. Often, if you can't imagine those 11 televisions on in your head at the same time, if you're talking to somebody, you're going to miss out on some of that information. If you miss out on some of that information, things are decontextualized, you get the wrong end of the stick of things, you jump to assumptions, and then you can have lots of arguments. Difficulties with boundaries and oversharing. This is something that our students find very difficult, especially with relationships. They'll go out with somebody, for example, on the second date, they've told them absolutely everything about their lives. This leads them to being quite vulnerable to manipulation, to abusive relationships and things like that. And also it makes things quite difficult for academic staff or professional staff that have got working relationships with them, and establishing and creating these boundaries as well. Difficulty making decisions and sticking with them. So if you think about all the being flooded with all these different thoughts, having social anxiety, and always thinking, right, I've made another error, I've made another error. They start to think about, okay, well, you know, I've made a decision. Well, actually, am I right? Am I wrong? And then they start to go back on their decisions. So that then means that there's high levels of social anxiety, and this can often lead to social isolation, so withdrawing from society completely, or masking. So often you'll see someone with ADHD being very charismatic, being the party person and stuff like that, but that is all masking. And masking and sort of scripting will lead to burnout eventually. And so people, when they come home, they're absolutely exhausted, and anybody living at home, partners or the family, will also be at the receiving end of this exhaustion and this social anxiety as well. So there can be lots of arguments and things like that, and breakdowns with relationships, and of course that all has a knock-on effect on academic performance. Impulsivity, so living in the moment and not thinking about the possible consequences later on. That can lead to all sorts of difficulties. Impulsivity for me looks slightly different. So, for example, I've got a lovely big scar on my hand. The other Christmas, the turkey was ready in the oven, so I put my hands in the oven to take the turkey out. And as I put my hands in the oven, my hand stuck to the top of the oven. And I suddenly realised that I should actually be wearing an oven glove. So that sort of impulsive behaviour there as well. There's slightly different type of impulsive behaviour. Oppositionality. If you try and have rules, you live by rules. If you're living in a world that you don't understand, you're going to try and create rules. But rules, the world's not black and white. The world's very grey and unpredictable. And so therefore, it's not that nobody living in that world is going to stick to those rules, and the world isn't going to be shaped by the rules that somebody has. So therefore, what happens is, if you ask somebody, well, actually, can you do this? And you see this with employees quite a bit. Can I ask you to do this, please? No, I'm not doing it. No, I'm not doing it, because it doesn't fit within the concrete world and the rules that that person wants the other person to live by, so that they feel secure. Starting a project, not seeing it through to the end, or not being able to start a project. So either losing interest because that dopamine flow has hit rock bottom again, or perceived criticism, so they get a grade perhaps that isn't that fantastic, and not seeing it as, oh well, that's just one grade, thinking, right, that's it, I'm absolutely rubbish, and that's where that low self-esteem kicks in again. That's it, I'm giving up. And so they don't see it through to the end. Fear of failure as well, and also fear of success. If I am successful, well then what then? and we see some students who feel safe within the university and they're scared of going out into the world of work. So what we're doing at City is we're trying to give a sort of transitional program, a holistic transitional program out into the world of work. Projection as well. So if I blame myself for things, so the students have explained this as type of self-loathing because they feel that they always get things wrong. They feel that the ego is really damaged, and so they feel that they have a sort of almost like a self-loathing is how they've described it. And so it's really painful to take responsibility then for those actions. So to project onto other people, it's not my fault, this is what it is. It's much easier to do that. Okay. No social filter as well. So if you find social norms difficult to understand and the nuances of social norms difficult to understand, that social filter is going to be off kilter as well. So we find that people ask sort of really inappropriate questions in inappropriate contexts and things like that. And so students and staff can get themselves into really sort of hot water without realising it. And we see as well with ADHD, there's a high co-occurrence in the DSM-5, so that's the main manual that's used to diagnose. Cluster B, mood disorders. So cluster B mood disorders are borderline personality disorder, histrionic personality disorder, narcissistic personality disorder, and at the extreme, sociopathy and psychopathy as well. And it's estimated that about 40% of people with ADHD also develop a mood disorder. It's thought that people are born with ADHD, but mood disorders are developed through the childhood trauma that someone with ADHD experiences, and it's developed over time because the mood disorders are often around childhood trauma and a damaged ego and things like that. Okay, so then we look at, so the person has their biopsychosocial disposition that they're born with, and into the class they're born into, the gender, culture, religion, etc. So this little picture here just shows you the layers of complexity of being human and the factors that affect self-image. So how do I see society and how does society see me? And these different intersecting factors and these drivers, they're constantly interacting with each other. They're constantly interrelated. And so feeling misunderstood and finding it difficult to communicate within this complexity is a real challenge for students. Okay, so staff often ask me at City, well, what are the strategies that I can use? Now, we have what are called student support plans. And what we say to the students is, what we say to the staff is, you can have as many strategies in place as you want, but if a student comes in on a specific day, and for example, they may have split up from their partner over the weekend, they come onto campus, their train's been delayed, they've lost their Oyster card, or they come onto campus and there's a sensory overload in the lecture hall and they're late for their lecture. So there's layer upon layer of anxiety, and so it hits a threshold and that student then has a meltdown. They become overwhelmed and have a meltdown. So so those strategies that are on that SSP may not be effective at all. So key to any sort of support are the human relationships of trust. So having one person, and it can't be a nominated person by anyone else other than the student, having one person that they can trust, that they can go to, who gets them, who understands how they communicate, their unique way of communicating. And for example, I've had an autistic student who said he didn't like working on the 3rd floor because he had a fear of heights. When I unpicked what that was with him, because I knew that he did mountaineering, what he said he found difficult was that he didn't actually like the course he was on, but he was finding it difficult to communicate that to his academic tutor. So it's about having someone to understand how that person communicates. So it's all about developing these working relationships of trust based on empathy and compassion. Anxiety, low self-esteem and poor self-image, they're central to the difficulties that our students experience. So any support, it should encompass strength-based strategies, and this will alleviate the anxiety. If you alleviate the anxiety, a lot of the characteristics and a lot of difficulties that students face, they don't come about. And often we see that any type of perceived poor behaviour is an attempt at communication, but they don't know how to communicate. So the way that we do support at City, when I came into the department, it was very much based on, this is the diagnosis, these are your reasonable adjustments, and off you go. What we've done now is we've taken a holistic approach to support. So we've looked at the flourishing of the whole person. Now, our philosophical underpinning for that is Martha Nussbaum's capabilities approach. And Martha Nussbaum had, her theory was that there are functioning, so it's a person's beings and doings. So that's being able to eat, being able to study, being able to read and write. And the capabilities, so these are the opportunities and the freedoms afforded the person so that their functionings can develop. So, for example, that will be the opportunity to go to university, for example. And it recognises, Nussbaum's theory recognises that a person is on a unique life journey and of self-realisation. And she takes the Aristotelian concept of the good, is that my good and what I perceive as the good and my own human flourishing may be very different from yours or from somebody else's, and that our self-realization and is constantly evolving. It begins at birth and it finishes when we die. And on top of that, she also says that we have a shared vulnerability as members of humanity. Vulnerability is not it's not a fault, and it's not a weakness. It's part of the human condition, and we are all vulnerable at different levels and different parts of our lives. So Nussbaum had a threshold framework, which she said was a way to live life worthy of human dignity with the aim of human flourishing. And this framework included to be able to live a life of a normal length, to have bodily health, bodily integrity, to have develop the senses, develop opportunities to develop the imagination and thought, to develop emotional literacy, to have be able to develop practical reasoning, including the development of intellect, to feel a part of different communities, to live in harmony with other animals as well, and play, the right to be able to enjoy things purely for the enjoyment of life, and to have control over one's environment. And that includes creating a holistic environment in which one can flourish. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. So we take this threshold framework and we put it into a practical framework. Okay, in the City, and we do this through Thomas Armstrong's positive niche construction. So positive niche construction it's a term that comes from biodiversity, and it's how an animal creates a life space where it can thrive. So if you think of, say, a beaver creates this dam, and the dam is there so that they can survive, so that they can live, they can be safe, so that they can find nourishment, etc., so they can thrive. It's their own version of the good, so to speak, and they're finding their own flourishing, and they're doing this instinctively. And so what Thomas Armstrong did is he put this within the human context and within education. So a book that he wrote was called it's called Neurodiversity in the Classroom. It's based on secondary schools, but it can transfer over to HE as well, but I recommend it. And positive niche, so the tenets of PNC within the education sector, and this is what we use within our student health and wellbeing, are strength awareness, strength-based strategies, universal design for learning and digital tools, positive role modelling, enhanced HR, so cross-team collaboration across the university, strength-based career aspirations and environmental modifications. So strength awareness will be when the students no longer, I tell my staff, and this was a big shock to them at the beginning, I said to them, I don't want you to look at the diagnosis to begin with, before you meet the student. A diagnosis is a hypothesis, it's an important piece of paper. It's a document rather. It's a hypothesis from a medical professional, a medical professional who is human and who is fallible, and it's a snapshot of a person's life at one time, and so therefore it should be seen as a tool rather than taking somebody's whole identity from it. So by the staff, the advisors, reading if they read the diagnosis before they saw the student, they've already automatically made a judgment about that other student. And even sometimes without realising it, because unconscious bias kicks in. Unconscious bias we all have, including myself. It's that knee-jerk reaction, okay? So they've already got an idea of that student before they've even heard them. So that's why I say don't look at the diagnosis first. Listen to the student's story, elicit the student's strengths, and then look at the diagnosis, and then come together with the student and co-creating their own support plan with using strength-based strategies. And we use universal design for learning, so that's learning in lots of different styles, lots of different ways. Assessment, for example, being done in different ways, so that could be having more vivas instead of written exams, for example. Positive role modelling, so we've positively recruited, purposely recruited neurodiverse staff. So a member of my team has ADHD, another member has autism, another is dyslexic, I'm dyspraxic. And also we've done a big drive on culture change across the university. So I'm co-chair of WAND, which is the Wellbeing, Accessibility, Neurodiversity and Disability Network, and it's staff facing. So what we do is we've encouraged staff to share their diagnosis or to share their neurodiversity and to celebrate that. So we've done what's called a Visible Voices campaign, where each of us has written our story and we've shared it. And it's about creating a community of not tolerance, but acceptance and celebration, and saying it's okay to do it. So when staff or students come to any of my lectures, the first thing I say to them is that I don't want them to mask. If they feel that they need to get up and walk around to be able to concentrate, they can do that. Okay. So it's about that, and check it, and one of self-reflection as well. So each member of my team has protected time for self-reflection over the course of the week. That's 1 hour a week, where they're looking at theory and also self-reflecting, because that's the only way that any unconscious bias or anything like that can come to the fore, and also it's the only way that they can evolve as practitioners if they are self-aware. And so with our appraisal system, we put we've embedded that within our appraisal system as well, this self-reflection. Okay. So positive role modelling like that, creating that affiliation, sense of affiliation and sense of community and acceptance across the university. And that feeds in also into enhanced HR and cross-team collaboration. So we work closely with careers and placements to make sure that the students are supported there and that they're ready for transitions to different places. We work with secondary schools to work about so that students feel confident coming in to HE. Strength-based career aspirations as well, so careers that will really lend themselves to the individual's support. So we start off with goal planning when we look at with the first couple of sessions. Where does the student see themselves when they leave City, after their journey when they leave City? What is it that they want to have achieved? And that's not just in an academic sense. So it's not just about getting the degree, it's also about exercise, nutrition, mindset, motivation, all those different things together. And also emotional intelligence as well. Environmental modifications. So we have what's called a student gateway project at the moment, and what we're doing there is we've got a whole new floor that's being refurbished, and we're creating an inclusive environment. So some of the modifications that I said before, the medicine balls and things like that, we've got a sensory room, we've got where they've got a massage chair, aromatherapy and things like that. We've also got quieter pods where staff and students can work and things like that. And it's where the students only have to tell their story once. They don't have to keep repeating it over and over again. So it's looking at systems as well. Okay, so the way that our department is structured, we're known as the Student Health and Wellbeing Department. And we are 4 teams. So the Student Health and Wellbeing Engagement Service are what we call our triage team. So they are the first port of call. So the student would email wellbeing, and then the student engagement team will contact them, and they'll have that initial conversation, and they will have what's called a standard SSP, a standard student support plan. So that would have on it extra time, etc. So within 24 hours, they've already got that up and running. They will then be signposted to the relevant team. So either my team, which is the Student Disability and Neurodiversity Service, or the Student Mental Health Service, or the Student Counselling Service as appropriate. And then those conversations that I've discussed with you take place. The student tells their story, and they create these goals together and strategies and plans. And then pages 2 and 3 of the SSP are then created. It's put into a repository in each school, relevant school, and then it's shared with academic staff. And we have ongoing liaison between our teams and the schools as well. And some students may access the mental health service and the neurodiversity service as well, and the counselling service. We have some students who will see us just once or twice, some who will see us for a few months, and then some who will see us every week throughout the time that they're with us. So what we'd like to see is the 3 ways in which we take this. So the awareness training, like we're doing now, reasonable adjustments and the inclusion, and developing this creative, inclusive community, and then specialist intervention as well. So the points of discussion, so going back to those first 2 sessions that we have with the students, the structure that it sort of takes is thinking things through, having an end goal and plan, looking for career enhancing opportunities at the university, being well informed, so investigating things, reading, asking, double checking, developing the right mindset, so a growth mindset, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. Understanding what higher level study means. A lot of students have been at the top of the class at secondary school and sixth form college, and they get to university and find out actually it's very difficult for them, and it's very different from what they've expected. And some neurodiverse students find that they weren't aware they were neurodiverse until they've come to university, when actually having to be more socially autonomous and having to study at certain levels, suddenly those difficulties start to kick in. And so what we have a screening. So we screen for ADHD, autism, dyspraxia and dyslexia. And then we can, so for example, students with ADHD, they can either go down the NHS route, so they can have a we refer them to their GP, but there is a 10-year waiting list for ADHD diagnosis in adult services, or they can be referred to CF Psychology, where they have what's called an SPLD assessment. This doesn't diagnose them with ADHD, but at the bottom of that report there is what's called a golden ticket letter, and that golden ticket letter will speed up the NHS process to a couple of years instead of a decade. Or then we signpost them to the other alternative is private assessment, but you're looking at about 1,400 for that. So also that we use the opportunity, so we show them how to access resources, including any assistive technologies, etc. How to look at support online with external agencies as well and on campus. And deciding what the student wants from study and the broader experience of being an HE. We talk about making wise choices, so the type of degree before they come to City, the use of time, etc. We look through organisational skills, that sort of thing. And then we look at expectations, so and encouraging the student to take responsibility for their own learning. So talking about the numbers of expected hours to be put in, the reading around the subject, joining societies, micro placements, work experience, and what that entails, and all the different types of transition that student will need to go through, and creating the support. So we provide workshops, we provide wellbeing cafes, one-to-one work as well. And then looking after their mental health and wellbeing, we do a big drive with City Sport. So we look very much at exercise, diet and healthy relaxation choices. We've got a wellbeing app at City, and we're also looking to another app which is called Move. So my colleagues at City Sport are working with our department, and so the student we'll put on the student's SSP that we recommend an exercise programme. And of course with the agreement of the student, and every time they follow the exercise programme at City Sport, they get points, rather like Sainsbury's Nectar points. And over time, what can happen is they can then, if they get a certain amount of points, they can cash them in for Virgin experiences and stuff like that. So it's a good way to keep them motivated, and especially like through the difficult times. So we take this sort of holistic approach to things. So just a very quick thing on fixed mindset. So we often see students coming through to us. They have rigid thinking patterns. They find it difficult with change. They worry about what others think. They avoid challenges. They choose safe or easy tasks, you know, and I always say that the only way that you can evolve is if you constantly push yourself outside your comfort zone. Running from setbacks, worrying about mistakes, and avoiding asking for help from others so as not to appear vulnerable or deficient. And so what we try and do is we try and develop what's called an athlete's mindset. So, for example, when I'm an athlete at national level. So what I will but I would say it's 80% mindset and 10% skill and 10% your physical ability as well, your physical fitness. Now, I go to the gym twice every day for 2 hours when I'm training, and then I'm on the water 3 times a week between 3 and 4 hours. Now, but more important is my mindset. Okay, and it's about having a positive mindset and not and being able to filter out all those negative things. It's being able to manifest your goals, manifest and see that you and reach those goals, visualize those goals, and build up the motivation, the stoicism, and the self-discipline to be able to do that. And self-discipline, of course, is what a lot of students in general, but a lot of neurodiverse students particularly have difficulty with because of that impulsivity. So we try and take everything that we see a lot of athletes using, the strategies that athletes use, and we put that we use that within our philosophy for supporting students. Okay, so yeah. So if you wanted to contact me, I'm at Sarah Hopp at city.ac.uk, and if you're more than welcome at any time to come and visit us at City, and we can show you around. And I'd love to hear from all of you about your sharing of good practice so we can swap ideas. And I hope you found that of some. That's a very sort of whistle-stop tour of the programme, which is sort of it's run in about 12 different sessions which go into sort of much more detail, but I hope you found that of some use.
Thank you, Sarah. Very, very, very interesting indeed. Yeah. Do we have any questions, comments in the chat, or unmute your mic if that's okay? We still have 5-6 more minutes. Yeah, yes, Alison. You're on mute, I think. Or
Sorry, I haven't got my... Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, I just got my microphone folded up. I'm really sorry. Have you got any ideas how we can transfer the practice that you're talking about with supporting students to supporting colleagues? Have you got any pointers on that or any references?
Yeah, that's a very good question, because one part of my job is with students and the other part is with staff, and it's really difficult. It's much easier with students because of that working relationship. With staff, it's much more difficult because you're having to deal with HR and occupational health and things like that. And if you're a line manager like I am, there's the added, you can sort of, you can create sort of supportive strategies and things like that. But if you're talking about your peers, it's much more difficult to have those conversations. So I would just say it's trying to sort of have, but it's very difficult when people are not self-aware as well. So how do you have those conversations? So what we really do is we try and build this awareness of neurodiversity and encourage sort of discussions around it and things like that. And what we found is that a lot more staff, because they feel, they come up and they say, well, actually, I think I might be neurodiverse, or I've always seen that there's something. So they see these commonalities, and it's about constantly, wherever there's an opportunity around the university, whether it's posters or whether it's anything like that, it's sort of creating this sort of culture of inclusivity so people feel that they can come forward or at least have those discussions. And also with the appraisal system as well. So not seeing the appraisal system as like your one-off appraisal meeting in the year, but also seeing it as part of a cycle. So they have staff one-to-ones, informal one-to-one meetings. We will have self-reflection sessions. We'll have team days away. Part of that could be having collaborative discussions with, say, careers and things like that. And then in the afternoon we'd go to an escape room or something like that. So it's very much on the social level as well. And then all of that feeding into the annual appraisal, and having a strength-based thing. So if staff aren't meeting a certain threshold, they're not carrying out the responsibility and they're finding it difficult, then having a supportive structure in place and saying, and also having a pre-appraisal meeting the month before, so that there are no surprises for the staff. So you say, okay, okay, these are your strengths. Let's discuss any concerns that you may have and that we may have. Let's have a plan together, and then you can go away and think about it for a month, and then we can have the appraisal afterwards. So there are no surprises or anything like that. And we found that's worked quite well. But it's really difficult when if you've got a peer, because you know what you do, and all you can do is just sort of be a friend, be understanding and stuff like that, and hopefully over time that sort of self-realization comes about. For me, I only realized I always knew that there was something. I was a late diagnosis, and I only realized that when I was actually doing my doctorate. And it was a philosophical study, and I was self-reflecting, and at the same time was having discussions with my students. And the more discussions I had with my students, the more I saw myself in the mirror. And then I thought, actually, and then I had a diagnosis of dyspraxia. So yeah, it's this journey of self-realization, which is always complex. So I'm sorry if that's a very long-winded way of not really giving you an answer, but is that okay? Sorry, Alison, you're on mute. Sorry.
Yeah, sorry, it helps. Thank you very much indeed.
Okay, you're welcome.
thank you. We have time for one more question, and we've got Prava with her hand up.
Hi, Sarah. That was really interesting to hear this from your own personal perspective, but also how you're kind of using this to shape education at City. It's going to take me some time to articulate this, but as you were talking, it was quite fascinating, because sometimes I got the sense when you started off that we're talking about humans just naturally being neurodiverse, and then there was this word like disorder, which all of us are more accustomed to, like almost like there's something wrong, whereas actually there is nothing wrong. It's just that people are neurodiverse. And I think in that sense, I was just thinking maybe somewhere along the line, maybe we're treating it as a disorder because of our own judgments and our own unconscious biases. And just taking it from that perspective, how much do you think would it be crucial in the strategies to also educate our students, not just those who are neurodiverse, not just those who kind of get a tag of ADHD or dyslexia, but just any student to kind of understand that people are neurodiverse, they are going to be dealing with neurodiverse, will have to collaborate with these people. And in fact, that may be a strength to the team. How much is that important in our education for just all students?
I think it's extremely important. We work a lot with the student union regarding this, and I can give you an example as well. We had a student with ADHD who he was constantly having arguments with his colleagues within student accommodation, and ended up one day he decided that it would be a good idea. He wanted to do some mindfulness and relax. He lit a candle, went out to Tesco's, forgot that he'd lit the candle, and of course the room went up in flames. And unfortunately, when the student came back, and of course understandably that they were like, right, this is it, we can't stand him, he's got to go, and blah blah blah. This, I went down there and I discussed the complexities of ADHD and autism, and they said, oh, we get it. And from then on, they saw him through a different lens. So we all have our own perspective because we've all had our own different childhoods, the way that we experience life. So we all see things from a different perspective. So, I think of the phrase quid est veritas, what is the truth? And the truth is our own perspective. So we all have our own realities. And so if you can help someone see someone from someone's different reality, and that doesn't mean excusing things when they happen, but just creating this understanding, then you can see they then started to try and support the other student, and they got on really well with them, and those friendships really happened. From a staff perspective as well, you talk about unconscious bias. Absolutely. We had a departmental meeting. There was a member of staff came in, and there were lots of we had cakes and lots of different things on the side. And this member of staff, he was on a high protein diet, so he sat down, opened a tin of beans, and started eating from the tin of beans. And everybody was shocked. Oh my goodness, Now, if he had picked up a croissant or he'd picked up a banana, nobody would have batted an eyelid. But because he opened a tin of beans, and it's not normal to open a tin of beans, all of a sudden there was this big drama around, and it created. So it's about, and that's why self-reflection is so important, because it's about being aware of those knee-jerk reactions. We can't but make judgments about people. I do it, we all do it all the time, and it's based upon our own preconceptions of things. So yeah, absolutely, completely.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Sarah. I think we're out of time, but really interesting. I put your email in the chat, and I'm sure you've got people already emailing you or messaging you on LinkedIn. For everyone else who asked, the recording will be available soon, so I'll put the link in the chat here as well once it's up on YouTube, so that everyone can access it. But thank you so much. Really, really interesting, and a pleasure to have you here today.
Thank you very much for having me, and it was a joy to speak to you all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.